So your van has some leaky valve cover gaskets. Well, let's set aside 1.5 to 2 hours and we'll knock this project out together. Go ahead and grab your tools. Time to dig in. I'm going to assume you already have your engine access cover removed. If not, well, let's start by removing the passenger seat. It's just 4 18mm nuts at the base. Then remove your 2 knee panels. There's 2 10mm bolts on each. Then pull them straight towards the back of the van, and they are removed. Finally, unlatch these 4 points on the engine cover to remove it. Degreasing the engine is obviously optional, but it's much nicer to work on a clean engine. And you also lower the risk of debris falling into the cylinder heads during the valve cover removal. It's also not a bad idea to lay down a drop cloth to protect the van's floor from any oil or grease. Let's go ahead and start with the driver's side valve cover. Pop off your PCV hose, disconnect the coil rail electrical plug, then remove all 4 of your spark plug wires. And be careful to only pull on the black dust boots, never pull on the wire itself. You may also need to pry this wire loom clip off of the stud. Mine was already off. And next, with your deep well 10mm socket, you can remove the 5 10mm studs holding on the coil rail. One of the studs is pretty close to the alternator, so it might not be a bad idea to go disconnect the battery. It's either a 8mm or 5/16 inch wrench. You just don't want to short out your ratchet on the positive terminal of your alternator. Anyway, the coil rail is now free. Just wiggle it out from under your wire harness and set it aside. Pretty simple from here. Just remove your 4 8mm bolts and remove the cover. I told you it was easy. If you want to be thorough, you can go degrease the valve cover at this point. Just make sure no degreaser or water is left inside the valve cover when it's time to reassemble. As strange as it sounds, engines don't like to have degreasers and water mixed with their oil. Now back at the engine, it's time to clean the gasket surface on the cylinder head. Be careful not to let the gunk and grime fall into the cylinder head. If you're using a razor or abrasive to clean the surface, just be careful because the heads are made of a soft aluminum which is pretty easily damaged. Now I did end up needing a set of pliers to remove the bolt grommets, but you could probably also use a pick or a small flathead screwdriver. It helps to put a little bit of oil on the new grommets just to assist with the bolt installation and getting it back into the valve cover. Now finally, go ahead and put in your new valve cover gasket. It fits into the groove and you can see the 3 dimples on the top for alignment. And of course, be careful when moving that valve cover back to the engine because you don't want your gasket to fall out. But from here, as you've probably safely assumed, it's just the opposite for the reinstallation. The torque specs for these valve cover bolts are 12 Newton meters, 106 inch-pounds, or just under 9 foot-pounds. The covers are cast aluminum, so you do want to be careful and you don't want to over-torque them. Now, I didn't have a torque wrench that went that low, but using a small 1/4 inch ratchet helps to make sure that you don't end up going too tight. Alternate back and forth when tightening the bolts from the center outwards until all 4 are good and tight. Pop your coil rail back on with those 5 studs. Reconnect your 4 spark plug wires, your harness clip, the PCV hose, and the coil pack connection. I told you it was easy. The passenger side is a little more complicated, but don't sweat it. We'll have your van back on the road in no time. For this one, we need to make a trip under the hood. You'll want to remove this 10mm bolt securing your oil dipstick tube to the oil fill tube. Next, there's a 13mm bolt down here which holds the oil fill tube to the engine. Here's an alternative view from inside the van. Once that's removed, you can pull out your oil fill tube from the valve cover. Then back to the same old, same old. We remove our spark plug wires, disconnect the coil harness, unclip the engine harness. Now you do need to loosen the 13mm nut from the transmission dipstick tube that's here on the back of the cylinder head. Once that's loose, you'll need to lift the tube up just a little and move it over to the left. Oh, and don't forget to unclip your second harness clip. Then it's time for those 5 10mm studs holding the coil rail. Get that out of the way, and then hit those 4 8mm valve cover bolts. Lastly, there is a hose running from the valve cover to the throttle body. And I'm imagining yours probably has a clamp on it. I'm not sure what's going on with this one. Anyway, get that off of the metal tube, then wiggle that valve cover out of there. Clean it all up. And then throw in those new bolt grommets and the gasket. And before putting it back on, I would recommend pulling your oil fill tube grommet off of the tube itself and putting it onto the valve cover. It makes it a little easier to slide the tube into the grommet once it's already in the valve cover. Also, don't forget that hose that leads back up to the throttle body. And then once you have your 4 valve cover bolts torqued and the fill tube back in place, then it's time to re-secure that fill tube with that 13mm bolt. Then while you're under the hood, might as well re-secure your oil dipstick tube to the oil fill tube. That's that 10mm bolt. And back inside the van, you can pop your coils on next, the 5 10mm studs. Then the plug wires. And make sure that you route your cylinder number 2 plug wire below the dipstick tube and not over it. Reconnect your coil rail harness and re-secure the engine harness in those 2 clips. Then finally put your transmission dipstick tube back in place and tighten that 13mm nut. Now be careful, I did have one of my fuel injectors come unplugged during the job, but I think that's only because the clip was already previously broken. And my final recommendation here, make sure to start the engine and make sure everything is kosher before hiding it away under that engine cover again. I let the engine warm up a while and checked for any unusual sounds and, of course, looking for any leaks. But it looked great and sounded normal, so it was time to button it all up. Hopefully this video gave you the motivation to knock this job out yourself. It is a super simple procedure and it doesn't take much time or money. If this job was on your own van and not a customer's, then I am going to encourage you to check out my channel for other Express or Savana van specific videos. At this time, there's a armrest replacement video, common water leak tracing and repair, HVAC check valve replacement, recliner lever adjustment, rear heat and AC bypass and removal, brake booster replacement, door bumper replacement, sliding door adjustment, window switch repair. And I was actually in the middle of filming my heated seat installation video when I decided to tackle this valve cover project. So keep an eye out for that one. Anyway, that's it. I'll see you guys over at the channel. Thanks for watching.